This coming Shabbos is known as Parsha Zachor, the mitzvah of remembering Amalek. We started Mishpatim, we read Parsha Shkolev, that was one of the Arba Parshas, the 4 portions. And this coming Shabbos we're going to be reading Parsha Zachor, and that's the mitzvah to remember what Amalek did to us when the Jewish people were traveling in the Midbar. So how exactly do we fulfill this biblical commandment of remembering Amalek? Okay, so let's have a moment of silence, everyone, or maybe 10 seconds of silence. I just think about Amalek, and that's it. Because the Torah says remember, so remembering, I remember in my head, in my heart. Do I have to actually say anything? So comes along the Gemara and Megillah, and our rabbis tell us that yes, because it's a double language. The Torah writes Zachor, to remember, but it also writes Lo Sishkach, never to forget. So the Gemara says, we already know when it says not to forget, Harei zeh Shichas Halev. That's telling me that I have to remember in my heart. Not to forget is to remember in my heart. Ma ani makayim. So what does the Torah have to tell me to remember? It must mean something positive. Zachor bepeh. We have to actually verbalize it. So we learn out from the Gemara, it's not enough just to think about what Amalek did to us, the arch enemy of the Jewish people. They attacked us. We didn't have usually when you attack somebody, you want to get something in return. You want to conquer land, territory. Here, it was the wandering Jew. We didn't even have any land yet. It was an attack against HaKadosh Baruch Hu. They wanted to minimize the miracles that happened in Mitzrayim. Like Rashi writes, that he gives an example where someone, let's say someone puts up a hot bath, a hot shower, a hot ocean, and you jump in, and a person gets burned. But nevertheless, in people's eyes, it cools it off. In other words, you claim to have the greatest security system. And for years and years, no one tries. One time someone tries and gets caught. Okay, so they say, you know what, he got caught, but I'll find out a way. It took away. Up until now, it was off limits, so to speak. So too, the Jewish people were off limits. Everyone recognized all the miracles that were done. And here they came in, Asher Karcha, Lashon Kar, they cooled us off. So it's not enough just to remember, we have to verbalize. Okay, but how do we verbalize? So the Rambam, Maimonides' opinion is simple. When is this mitzvah? So the Rambam writes, mitzvahs aseh, there's a positive commandment every day of the year. 354 days in a year, or 383 if there's a leap year, you have to remember what Amalek did to us. Mitzvah liskor tamid, we have to remember the ma'asav haran, the terrible deeds. So according to the Rambam, it's a mitzvah every day of the year, and by us talking about it, we fulfill our biblical mitzvah according to the Rambam. In fact, the Magen Avram writes, when we say in our morning prayers, right before Shema, we say in Ava Rabbah, B'keiraftanu l'shimcha hagado. We wait for when your name is going to become great, the great name of God. So what is that an allusion to? Amalek is an allusion to, as long as Amalek is around, God's name is incomplete, so to speak. The kisei hakavod. So when we say that we wait for B'keiraftanu l'shimcha hagado, one should have in mind to fulfill that biblical commandment of remembering what Amalek did. In fact, some have a minute at the end of davening, the Shei Sechiros, and one of the memory. But according to the Rambam, the mitzvah is every day of the year to remember, and again, remember means to actually verbalize. That's the opinion of the Rambam. Tosfos writes in Megillah, Brachas, that perhaps, no, the mitzvah is not enough. It's not enough just to verbalize, but you have to read it mitoch haksav. You have to read it from a Sefer Torah. You have to read it from a klaf, which is our minhag. that we read it in Shabbos. And sure, we take out a Sefer Torah and we read it after the Parashat Shavua. So that's what Tosfos adds. It's not enough just to verbalize it, but we have to actually read it in a Sefer Torah. And the Rush adds a third dimension. Is not only do you have to verbalize it, not only do you need a Sefer Torah scroll, but you also need a tzibur. You have to do it in a minyan. You have to do it in a communal way. It's a communal mitzvah. And that's our practice. We are strict for the opinion of the Rush. We read it in Shul Shabbos morning. And in fact, where is this Rush? Where is this Rush that says you have to read it b'tzibur? So there's a famous Gemara in Brachas in a different context, and we'll see how the Rush fits in. The Gemara talks about one of the rabbis, I think it was Rabbi Eliezer. He walked into shul one day, and what do you know? There are only 9 people. Sound familiar? Okay, we only have 6, 7. But sound familiar? Only 9 people. And he brought with him an Eved Kanani. Again, no connection to slavery as in America with the blacks and Lincoln Frank. That was never condoned in Judaism. The special laws of how to treat a slave, and it's no wonder the slave wants to stick around afterwards. Because if you eat steak, you can't give him chicken. If you only have one pillow, he gets it. There are many strict laws regarding how, and this person, how a person became an Eved, is differently. So here we're talking about an Eved Kanani, a non-Jewish slave, but he's like a quasi-Jew. And so Rabbi Eliezer freed his slave, went through the process, go to the mikveh, etc., then he used him for a minyan. So the Gemara asks, what are you talking about? How could he do that? There's a prohibition of freeing a slave. Lo bahem ta'avodu. They always have to be slaves. So the Gemara adds, no, mitzvah shani. For mitzvah purposes, it's okay. What do you mean for mitzvah purposes it's okay? The good old double standard? Mitzvah haba ba'avera. It's not acceptable. It's a mitzvah done through the means of a sin. As we all know, the classical case in the Gemara in Sukkah, if you steal someone's daled minim, his lulav, esrog, hadassim, and aravos, you steal it and then you shake it, not only have you not gotten the mitzvah, but you have violated the avera of stealing. That's a mitzvah haba ba'avera. So what do you mean mitzvah shani? It's a mitzvah haba ba'avera. And therefore you can't do an avera of freeing a slave for a mitzvah. So the Gemara answers, you're right, but there's something special about this mitzvah. It's a mitzvah derabim. It's a public mitzvah. You're right, when it comes to a private mitzvah, personal mitzvah, we say mitzvah haba ba'avera. However, we see, not only in this area, but in other areas of halacha as well, a mitzvah derabim has special significance. A mitzvah done for the community, for the public, that takes on a different status, qualitatively different than just a private mitzvah. In fact, Tosfos over there raises the following issue. We know there's a concept of Yontiv of Simcha. On Pesach, Sukkot, Shavuos, there's a holiday, there's a mitzvah of Simcha, B'samachta b'chagecha, we rejoice. And we all know, Ein Simcha ela b'basar v'yayin. Simcha entails some good old-fashioned ribs, some nice bar tanura, Muscati wine, the works, etc. And and if you like other foods, women, it's jewelry, nice clothing. For kids, it's some nice candy. Whatever it is a mitzvah of simcha. There's a mitzvah of simcha on Yontiv. However, there's a major issue. Let's say someone dies before Yontiv, during. So what about mourning? What about, we know there's a mitzvah of avelis. When someone dies, we mourn for them if they're one of the 7 relatives. So the problem is we have a conflict. What happens when the mitzvah of Simchas Yontiv coincides with the mitzvah of avelis? What gives? So the Gemara tells us, no mourning on Yontiv, the mitzvah of joy supersedes it. Why? Because you might say, well, because joy outweighs mourning. That might be true, but that's not what the Gemara says. The Gemara says for another reason. The Gemara says is because Simchas Yantav is a public mitzvah. All the Jewish people all over the globe are celebrating Yantav. So it's a public community mitzvah. It's a mitzvah derabim. However, we know Avelis is only a private affair. You lost a loved one, so you're mourning. Or whoever lost their loved one, but it's not a public. So the Gemara says the public mitzvah of Simcha overrides the private affair of mourning. That's the Gemara. However, there's a machlokes, Rambam and Tosas, how do you interpret the Gemara? So the Rambam's opinion is, even today that we don't have a temple, we still have a biblical mitzvah of Simcha. And therefore, and the Rambam's opinion is as well, the first day of mourning is biblical. So according to the Rambam, you learn the Gemara as follows. The public biblical mitzvah of Simcha beats out the private biblical mitzvah of mourning. According to everyone, the result's the same. There's no mourning. But the Rambam says they're both biblical, but public beats private. Tosas says they're other way around. Today we don't have a temple, so Simcha is only rabbinical. And Avelis, Tosas says, which is the Minhag Ashkenaz, that mourning is always rabbinical, even the first day. And therefore, the way Tosas learns the Gemara, the public mitzvah of Simcha, the public rabbinical mitzvah of beats out the private rabbinical mitzvah. So however you learn it, it comes out the same. Tosas says they're both rabbinical. According to Rambam, they're both biblical, and therefore the public beats out the private. Comes along Tosas and raises the following question. What about, so it's obvious if you have a public biblical versus a private biblical, or a public rabbinical versus a private rabbinical, public wins. What happens if you have a public rabbinical mitzvah versus a private biblical mitzvah? Again, a public rabbinical mitzvah versus a private biblical mitzvah. When can we have that? I'll tell you when we can have that. The last day of Yantif, according to the Svardim. The last day of Yantif is only, in Chutz La'aretz, is only rabbinical. We keep an extra day out of the land of Israel. That's only rabbinical. And according to those opinions that the first day of mourning is biblical, so you have a case where, what do you do on the last day of Yantif? So on one hand, you have the public rabbinical mitzvah versus the private biblical. So now you have a machlokas. We showed them, but the point being, we see how strong a public mitzvah is, and according to some opinions, a public rabbinical mitzvah, because the rabbim is so powerful, even could beat out a private biblical mitzvah. So the Rush points out as follows. So keeping this in mind, the Rush says, so what are we talking about here? So the Rush says, don't tell me. So the simple reading of the Gemara is, well, what mitzvah we're talking about? You could say we're talking about the mitzvah of tefillah b'tzibur, the mitzvah of davening with the minyan. That's what it seems to be. So what do we see from this Gemara? The davening in minyan is very important, but it's only a rabbinical mitzvah, not a biblical mitzvah. So we see, and freeing a slave is a biblical mitzvah. So we see the Gemara said you're allowed to violate the biblical private mitzvah in order to fulfill the public mitzvah of tefillah b'tzibur. So we see from this Gemara that it seems to show that a public rabbinical mitzvah beats out a private biblical mitzvah. So maybe you'll argue no. So the Rush says, don't, I know what you're thinking, don't tell me, you know when this happened? Parashat Zachor, this coming Shabbos. That, you know why, really, a public rabbinical mitzvah can't win. We're talking about a public biblical mitzvah. What public biblical mitzvah? Parashat Zachor. But we see from this comment of the Rush that he says that you need a minyan for Parashat Zachor. Even though we find out parenthetically from his comment, because if he didn't need a minyan, what's he talking about? Why does he have to bring up Parashat Zachor? So we see from this Rush that Parashat Zachor requires a minyan. So we see from here, and so unless you want to not say like the Rush and say, if you tell me we're talking about Parashat Zachor, so then it wouldn't be a proof. Parashat Zachor is biblical, so maybe that's a discussion in the Rishonim, how you learn the Gemara. Well, if we're talking about Shabbos, that you allowed to free a slave or not on Shabbos, that's a further discussion. But we see from here 3 opinions. What comes out is, how do we fulfill our biblical commandment of Parashat Zachor? According to the Rambam, it's a biblical mitzvah every day of the year. I do not need a Sefer Torah. Just talking about it right now, just remembering the evil deeds of Amalek, we get our biblical mitzvah. Tosas introduces the concept of reading it from a Sefer Torah. But if you have a Sefer Torah in your home, you can just take it out and read from a Sefer Torah and you get your mitzvah. It's only the Rush who brings up the concept of reading it b'tzibur, and that's our practice. We try to be strict like the Rush, and we try to hear it in shul. That's why even those people who don't come to shul, but they should try to come, especially women, which is a separate discussion whether women have to hear it or not, but the practice, women try to come to shul and hear Parashat Zachor, and there's a whole discussion maybe having later minyanim for people who missed it. But that's all based on this Rush, that Parashat Zachor is a mitzvah that requires not only a Sefer Torah, but it requires a minyan. In fact, there is an interesting, are women obligated in Parashat Zachor? So, if you assume, like the Rambam, that it's every day of the year, then it's not a time-oriented mitzvah. If you assume the mitzvah is done once a year, on the Shabbos before Purim, so then maybe you could argue it's a time-oriented mitzvah and women are exempt. Or perhaps you could argue they're exempt for another reason, even if you assume it's not time-oriented. But I'll come back to that in a second. But maybe it's not a fundamental machlokas whether you read it once a year or every year, because we have a Gemara in Brachas which tells us that a person remembers things for Yud Beis Chodesh. They remember things for 12 months is the expression of the Gemara. And therefore, it's talking about Avelut. You don't forget your loved one. Of course, you remember your loved one forever. The different levels of remembering. The Shiva, Shloshim, Yud Beis Chodesh. So the Gemara tells us, for Yud Beis Chodesh, you remember your loved one. That's why for a parent, we say Kaddish for 11 months, etc. So they point out that, so maybe that's what it means. Even those who say you only read it once a year, but the mitzvah is every day. We just have to do it once a year. If you do it once every year, you remember it for 12 months. In fact, some take the Gemara literally 12 months, and they say in a year of a leap year, when we have 13 months, that's too late. You have to make sure you read it. You have in mind, when it comes from Parashas Kiseitze, at the end of Devarim, you should have in mind to fulfill your mitzvah then. But for someone, it's a whole discussion whether women are obligated or not, whether it's a time-oriented mitzvah or not. And even if it's not time-oriented, then maybe they're exempt for another reason, which is another discussion of, there is another mitzvah to destroy Amalek. Besides remembering them, is a mitzvah to destroy them. And some say women are exempt from the mitzvah of destroying Amalek. So, and because they're not involved, they don't get involved in war. Labnei Mechaman and the women are exempt from battle. So if you assume the mitzvah of remembering and the mitzvah of destroying is connected, so then you could argue that they're exempt for another. So that's a whole discussion. Of course, it's by Yikar Adin they probably are exempt, but it's preferable for women to try to hear it. Do they have to actually come to shul Parashat Zachor? Let's say someone misses Parashat Zachor. They're sick. They can't. The kids. They can't go out. There's a big snowstorm. Whatever you want to make up. Let's say you miss Parashat Zachor. So according to the Rambam, there's no reason to miss it. You just do it every day of the year. You just talk about it. According to the Tosis or the Rashi, you need a Sefer Torah, or you need a Sefer Torah with a minyan. Then is there any makeup? So there's an interesting Trumas Hadeshin. The Trumas Hadeshin is one of the classic Halachic poskim. He was asked the following question. He says, what happens, someone's locked up in jail, and they could get parole for one day. They're letting you out one day, and your choice is you can either pick Shabbos before Purim, Shabbos Parshas Zachor, or you could go out on Purim itself. So what should you do if you have a choice between getting out for Shabbos Parshas Zachor or getting out for Purim? What is the appropriate choice? So the Trumas Hadeshin, that's a discussion. So some claim that you should go out Purim. Well, some say one simple pshat is you should go out Shabbos Parashas Zachor because that's a biblical mitzvah. Again, assuming you need a minyan and a Sefer Torah, or else you could do it in jail. But assuming like the Rush, you need a minyan and a Sefer Torah, assuming you don't have a minyan in jail, but that's a separate discussion. But assuming you have to get out, so you would think you'd have to go Shabbos, Parashas Zachor, that's biblical. And Megillah is only rabbinical, or at least from the prophets. That's another shia, what the status of Mikra Megillah is. However, even though that might be true, but the Magen Avram writes, you should go out Purim. Why? If Purim's only rabbinical or Midivrei Kabbalah, and Parashas Zachor is biblical, why does he say you should go on Purim? Because based on another reason. We know, yeah.
Miracle, a nest.
Very good, yeah, Afhein right. Afhein hayu b'osanes. That's why certainly if you're a woman you should, because women are definitely obligated in Megillah reading. They might not be obligated in Parashas Zachor, right, because of the miracle, as we'll get to right now. Because if you'll notice, Purim, before we read the Megillah Purim morning, we also take out a Torah scroll and we read at the end of Parshas Beshalach, which we just read a couple of weeks ago, which also talks about Amalek. So the Magen Avram says you could knock both of them off in one sitting. You don't need the babysitter on Shabbos. Come to Shul Purim morning, and you'll fulfill your mitzvah of Parshas Zachor by the Torah reading Purim morning, and then you listen to the Megillah. So he says one should go, if you only get one day off, and for that matter, if you miss Parshas Zachor, come to Shul Purim morning and you can knock them both off. The Mishnah Berurah doesn't like it. The Mishnah Berurah says you cannot fulfill your mitzvah of Parshas Zachor with Parshas Beshalach. The question is why? What's the issue? What's in the Kudas HaMachlokes? Why does the Magen Avram say that you can fulfill your mitzvah with Vayavo Amalek, and the Mishnah Berurah says no? So it seems to be the issue we just raised. What is the nature of the mitzvah? There's two mitzvahs here. There's a mitzvah of remembering Amalek, and there's a mitzvah of destroying Amalek. Is there a link between these two mitzvahs, or they're two independent mitzvahs? So that could be the issue.
There is in the Megillah. The two are linked in the Megillah. And the Megillah to me is a form of remembering Amalek. To me, Haman is one of the offspring, one of the byproducts of Amalek.
Exactly, yeah, that's why we do the booing, right, and we stamp for Haman, right, very good. In fact, that's how we learned some of it out. So, as he's saying along those lines, that there's a mitzvah of remembering Amalek and there's a mitzvah of destroying Amalek. So, if you look in Parashas Zachor, that comes from Parashas Kiseti. That focuses on our mitzvah of destroying Amalek. Timcha Zecher Amalek. In Parshas Beshalach, it's not as explicit. So the Mishnah Brura says you cannot fulfill. In other words, the Mishnah Brura says does not mention in Parshas, there's not explicit mention in Beshalach of destroying Amalek. So we're talking about remembering Amalek. Apparently, the Mishnah Brura learns like the Ramban and other Rishonim that the mitzvah of Zechiras Amalek is linked to the mitzvah of Mechias Amalek, and therefore you can't fulfill one without the other. Hence, he says reading Parshas Beshalach doesn't work. The Magen Avraham clearly disagrees and says they're two independent mitzvahs, and therefore he says you can be Yotzi. So again, it's best to come to Shul Shabbos Parshas Zachor. But if you miss it, we might have a second minyan for you anyway, or a third minyan. If you miss that, you could always, according to you, have the Magen Avraham to rely on and hear the Parasha B'Shalach Purim morning. One more point is, but for a woman who misses Parasha Zachor, according to everybody, she should be able to. The Machokas, the Magen Avraham and the Mishnah Brura is only for a man. Could he fulfill his mitzvah Purim morning? But for a woman, everyone should agree. Why? Because what's the only reason why we say it's a problem for a man? He can't fulfill his mitzvah of Zechiras Amalek according to the Mishnah Brura on Parashas Beshalach, because there's no mention of destroying Amalek. But we said women are exempt from the mitzvah of destroying Amalek. So Mamanashach, if the mitzvah of remembering is connected to destroying, women are exempt. The only reason they'd be obligated is because it's independent. If it's independent, Parshas Beshalach takes care of it anyway. So the post can point out, for a man, you have the Magen Avraham to rely on, but it's best to try to make it. But for a woman, according to everyone, we should agree that especially if a woman can't make it out, she has more to rely on, because maybe even the Mishnah Brura would agree that when it comes to a woman, she can fulfill a mitzvah Parashas Zachor Purim morning. So let's summarize. We discussed there's a biblical mitzvah of remembering Amalek. So I'll just think about it? No. Because it says Lo Sishkach, and it says don't forget, and it says to remember. From don't forget, I remember, I have to remember. To remember, it tells me bepeh, I have to verbalize it. So what does it mean I have to verbalize it? So the Rambam says you verbalize it every day. You don't need a text. You just talk about it. You get a daily mitzvah. That's what the Magen Avraham says. You have in mind. You have Tosfos who says, introduces the concept you have to fulfill the mitzvah on a Sefer Torah. They learned that out from the Psukim. And the Rosh takes it a step further. Not only do you need a Sefer Torah, you need a minyan. And we says, where does the Rosh get this from? Well, because the Rosh says, and don't tell me we're talking about Parashas Zachor. What do you mean? Why is he bringing up Parashas Zachor when he's freeing a slave to make a minyan? Apparently the Rosh holds you need a minyan. So we had a whole discussion on no mourning on Yontif, but the issue was if you have a public rabbinical mitzvah versus a private biblical mitzvah, perhaps we see how great a public mitzvah is that we don't say mitzvah b'av aveira, and maybe it even takes precedence over avelis and other mitzvahs. So we say those are the three opinions. We're strict for the rush. What happens if someone has a choice, only can come one day? So some say you should come Parashas Zachor because that's biblical. The Magen Avraham says no, he might as well come Purim because he gets both. He can fulfill both mitzvahs at the same time. The Mishnah Brura says he can't, because the question is whether the mitzvah of remembering is linked to the mitzvah of destroying or not. And we point out, but for a woman, everyone would agree, since a woman is exempt from the destroying parts, if the mitzvah of remembering is connected to destroying, women are exempt completely. And if it's a separate mitzvah, so everyone would agree that when we read the Torah Purim morning, one fulfills the biblical mitzvah of Zechiras Amalek. Any questions? Comments?
I can't help thinking it's very important for a woman to read about Queen Esther's, about a woman's role in destroying the offspring of Amalek.
Absolutely, yeah. In fact,
because it sets an example for her. Although she may not be obligated to kill, Esther didn't kill either.
Excellent point.
She used her wiles, her brain, her imagination, to bring about the destruction, which a woman should be encouraged to, whichever Jewish woman should.
Absolutely. In fact, some even say they're the primary. Haman, they were the main people. Esther was the main person in the Purim, and the women in Egypt, they were the main women. In fact, speaking about a public mitzvah, Esther, she was willing to live with Achashverosh in order to save the Jewish people. It was only because of Esther's tremendous, she had to live with Achashverosh all those years in order to fulfill the final plan of destroying Haman. So, speaking of public mitzvah, Esther was the ultimate in sacrifice. She gave up everything she had to give up to live with Achashverosh all those years, all for the sole reason of saving Klal Yisrael. Yeah. She followed the advice of Mordechai, and that's the ultimate sacrifice. And Esther is clearly one of the major figures, and there's a lot to learn from her dedication. It's very good.